Good afternoon. I am Lillian Lodge Copenhaver, Executive Director of the Copenhaver Center for the Advancement of Women in Communication at Florida International University. I am pleased to welcome you all to the Virgil and Joann Smith Thought Leaders Forum for Women's History Month, Women Leading Change, Making a Difference. Our presentation today is one of the signature programs of the Copenhaver Center in support of its mission to empower young women in order to develop visionaries and leaders who can make a difference in their communities and in their professions. We are all aware that women make up more than half the population of our country, and it is important that we have a gender balance in all the forms in which we communicate information so that we can build a more equitable and inclusive society. Our program today features two amazing women who will discuss a topic of vital interest to us all. The way we communicate is changing, as we are all aware. Over the decades, women have broken barriers in almost every field, and our speakers today, who have broken those barriers, will discuss how women are making a difference and leading change, and what that means for all of us. We will take questions from the audience following our keynote presentation, so please type them in the chat room. Our convener this afternoon is Dr. Diane Lynch, president of Stevens College for the past 15 years. Under her leadership, the college has developed a strategic focus on the creative and performing arts and the health sciences, earning national honors in recognition of its communication design, performing arts, and undergraduate research. Prior to coming to Stevens in 2009, Dr. Lynch served as Dean of the Roy H. Park School of Communications at Ithaca College and chair of the Department of Journalism at St. Michael's College in Burlington, Vermont. She was also the founding executive director of the National Online News Association, the editorial director of the first national study of the credibility of online news, the editor of the first textbook on the ethics of digital news, and the inaugural recipient of ONA's Founder Award for contributions to digital journalism. She wrote a biweekly column about women and technology for abcnews.com, a weekly column on new media ethics for the Christian Science Monitor, and was a longstanding member of the Journalism Advisory Board of the Knight Foundation and an inaugural member of the panel of judges for their News Challenge Awards competition. She also authored a national study on the future of American journalism and journalism education. Dr. Lynch was the 2019 recipient of the Mid-Missouri NAACP Distinguished Service Award. She was also selected as among the Missouri top influencers by the Kansas City Star, was named by the Columbia Business Times as one of the 10 most influential women in Columbia, Missouri, and was the recipient of the Athena Leadership Award, presented annually in recognition of exceptional community service and career achievement. Our keynote speaker for this afternoon, Maribel Perez Wadsworth, is president and CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, as well as a trustee of the foundation. She is the first woman and the seventh president to lead the foundation. Drawing on her expertise and publisher of USA Today, Wadsworth brings a well-honed commitment to Knight's mission of informing and engaging communities. Starting as an editorial assistant with the Associated Press in 1994, Wadsworth's career evolved from reporter and editor roles to a key position in Gannett's corporate team, where she led the company's digital transformation. As president of the USA Today Network and later publisher of USA Today, she led a team of more than 4,000 journalists in more than 200 communities across the country. During her tenure, Gannett newsrooms were recognized with 5 Pulitzer Prizes. In addition to her professional achievements, Wadsworth is committed to diversity and inclusion. receiving the News Leaders Association's Robert G. Magruder Award for Diversity Leadership in 2019. Actively contributing to the industry, she serves on the governing board of the Pew Research Center and the board of the Associated Press, addressing challenges and shaping the media landscape. With her new position at night, she is returning to her hometown of Miami. I am also delighted to say that both of our distinguished speakers today are members of the Leadership Council of the Copenhagen Center. It is now my honor to present Maribel Perez Wadsworth.
Well, thank you so much, Lillian. And first, let me thank you not only for that great introduction, but also thank you for your incredible leadership and support of women in communication, and frankly, more broadly than that. I want to start today just sharing a little bit about me and a little bit more about my career journey, and then really transition to what I'm very much looking forward to is a wonderful conversation with the trailblazing President Lynch. I'm very excited to be here with Diane today. So just a little bit more about me. I've spent the majority of my career working as a journalist in the past little more than a decade. Also, as you heard from Lillian, as a media executive. And I began my career right here in Miami, where I've just returned, coming full circle, as a reporter at the Associated Press before joining local newsrooms that were part of the Gannett Company, which is, for those of you who don't know, the largest publisher, news publisher in the US. At the end of 2022, I stepped down from Gannett after 27 years with the company. And by then I had become president of Gannett Media and publisher of USA Today. And as you just heard today, I'm the new president and CEO of the Knight Foundation, which is a national private foundation that invests to help citizens become informed and engaged, to strengthen communities and to help sustain democracy. And part of the way we do that is investing back into a sustainable foundation for journalism. So really still very focused on the same mission that has been so much a part of my life and so much of what's been important to me. So how does a career arc go from newly minted 20-year-old college graduate and cub reporter to running one of the nation's largest media companies, and now running a very different, but also very mission-driven philanthropy? Well, you know, to answer that question, it's a question I get often is, you know, how did you know you wanted to run a media company? And truthfully, I had no idea. I couldn't have actually imagined that as a possibility. As a young reporter, I just wanted to be a great reporter. And then I thought, well, maybe I could become an editor and have a hand in deciding what things get covered. And I can tell you honestly that perhaps my highest aspiration back then was, you know, ultimately to be a managing editor, basically the number 2 position in charge of a newsroom. So I didn't even have top editor on my bingo card back then, let alone thinking that I would at some point be running the company. And we'll get into a lot more about that when Diane joins me in a few minutes here. But for now, I'll say this. There was no straight line that took me from point A to where I am today. There are no clearly marked rungs on the ladder. In fact, some of the most important transitions and growth opportunities happen completely outside of the what we'd consider the typical construct of promotions and authority and titles and you know, a big team of direct reports. So that may be the most important point I hope to leave you with in our time today. Leadership isn't conveyed in titles. Anyone can exert leadership, even as an individual contributor in an organization. early in your career, and often it's in those moments that others really will start to see your potential. And maybe, as was often the case for me, potential that you don't see for yourself, at least not yet. And opportunities for career advancement, for having greater impact and influence in your organization will then naturally start to occur. And that said, that there's another, I think, important point that I always try to share when talking to people about, career journeys and career development, and that is never ever assume that others know what's important to you or what you're interested in. I remember being really early, yet in my own career as a mid-level editor in a local newsroom, and uh, maybe had been in that role a couple of years, and one day it was announced that a colleague had been promoted into a role I didn't even know existed. It was newly created, and I remember thinking, well, now wait a minute, I would have loved to have that opportunity. I have a chance to apply for it. And what I learned from that is that ensuring that I was having regular conversations about longer term goals with my bosses was really, really important. And that, really with that knowledge, they could help me achieve my goals. And the best ones would actually challenge my thinking about what my goals were or could be. Some of my best mentors over time really helped me to sort of redefine, rethink what was possible for me, and really widen the aperture of possibilities. So that's really, really important. So here I am now, after this long career in journalism with many zigs and zags. And as you know, zigs and zags in an incredibly disrupted industry that is local journalism in particular, but the media industry writ large, but still an incredibly vital industry. And so now here I am running the Knight Foundation, still supporting journalism from a very different perspective. And as you heard, very happily coming full circle to this place where I grew up, where I went to school, where I began my career. And so it's a very special, I will say, welcome home. And I'm really delighted to be here. So I just wanted to lay a little bit of that backdrop, but really I'm looking forward to getting started in more of a conversation with Diane. So I'd love for you to join me now.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here. I want to extend my thanks as well, Maribel, to you for taking the time. Your expertise and your experience already, I know, is of value to my students and to the students around the country who are watching this. So they are so eager to learn from you and other powerful women what leadership is and what does it mean and how can I grow up to be you. It's really
No, grow up to be you. Grow up to be whoever you need to be.
Exactly. Well done. Exactly. So I'm gonna ask you some questions about some of the things that you've just said, and then I'm gonna ask you to talk about some other things that I know are really important to you related to leadership, such as the importance of inclusion and diversity, and what does management and leadership look like in those contexts. And then I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about technology and how do you lead change management, and then how do you do that at this looking forward to what is clearly going to be one of the most extraordinary times of change management, certainly in our history. So, obvious question. You talked about being a young journalist. You talked about living your life zigzagging, right? You talked not necessarily knowing that straight line. Yeah. But as a young journalist a young professional who was certainly ambitious, there had to have been others, male or female, or gendered in between, who were role models for you and who maybe taught you something about the characteristics and qualities of leadership and management. Can I ask
no
you?
question. And you can imagine over a long career, there are many of those people at different junctures that brought different things. One person that really immediately comes to mind, her name was Harriet Simpson, and we lost Harriet a few years ago. She was an assistant managing editor and one of my bosses at the News Press in Fort Myers, Florida. So many, many moons ago. But she was an excellent journalist. But what she taught me wasn't really about journalism. What she taught me was about how important it was to care for the people, whether that was our readers, but often for Harriet, it was really about caring for our team. And she had just a remarkable way of always knowing what was going on in people's lives and when they needed a little bit of extra space or a little bit of encouragement or some, greater flexibility in one way or another. And I learned, I feel, a lot from her. The way she made me feel is how I wanted others to feel, being my colleague, and ultimately, what I wanted from people who were working for me. And so I really carried that with me always. And so that was Harriet's very important contribution to helping to shape how I thought about what was important, and really building my own value system as a leader, as someone who had the care and responsibility ultimately of a lot of other people in an organization. And so that was really, really important. Another person later in my career who was really important was Gracia Martori, who, when I first met her, was the CFO of Gannett. And the first woman who had been in that role, and you can imagine, in finance at a major, at the time, Fortune 500 company, not easy to get there. And yet, and she is still with us, tough as nails, but also never lost sight of how important it was to bring others along. And she saw potential, and she, encouraged me to take on projects that I frankly didn't think I was necessarily up for. And there was tremendous learning in that. And so that was important in terms of how she guided and mentored me. But I think the most singular thing that she impressed upon me was to debunk the myth that you're trying to strive for some perfect balance between life and work, and that was possible. And she just tore that idea to shreds right away and said, that is not reality. You can have it all, just not all at the same time. And she didn't mean you had to pause your career to have a family or anything like that. She just meant you really have to have focus and an ability to compartmentalize at times. And you need to be very, very present, as fully present as possible in those moments, whether it's with your family, with your, kids at a, track meet or what have you, or it's, in your work. And that was very clarifying, actually, because, I was a young mom at the time. I was trying to, do really great at work and show what I could do, and also be, super mom. And, most days I just felt like I was failing at all of it. And so it was really important advice that she gave me. And so those are two that I would call out as having, incredible importance in my career.
Such good lessons. The idea that work-life balance is something that you can just plan for somehow when it happens
Right.
moment to moment, right? And
Exactly.
every day is different. So as you went from newsroom scale, individual scale, as you talk, one-on-one, people, your community, into management and leadership, how do you maintain, or how did you maintain those values and that compassion and the attention to those individual people around you? How does that scale?
Well, first, for me, it's always been very important to stay very, very connected to the people. I remember when I made the decision, I'd been offered an opportunity to join our corporate team in Virginia. I was leaving a local newsroom for the first time to be in a corporate setting. And my biggest fear was becoming disconnected from the work and the people. And so I was very intentional about avoiding that. I would spend a lot of my time visiting our various newsrooms. Now, it wasn't about one newsroom, but it was about visiting our various newsrooms across the country. It was staying connected to our customers in those places, and really understanding, the challenges and all of that. I think that's no different really than what was important about the new relationships that I was needing to build and maintain in my new role and in my new work setting, with different colleagues and across a variety of disciplines. Now I was not just in the newsroom and in the journalism world, but really having a broader importantly needed to be much more cross departmental, cross-disciplinary. So whole new relationships. But the through line of all of that has been just working hard to get to know people. People say build relationships. Well, that starts with getting to know them and understanding what's important to them and understanding, what's meaningful to them and what resonates and on all of that. So putting in that work, I think, was incredibly important and did ultimately help me to stay very connected to the things that matter, the people and the mission and the customers.
As human beings, I often say that management would be easy if it weren't for the people.
That's right.
And I say that with great love and affection to the people I manage. But management is one kind of skill and leadership is a different kind of skill.
Totally.
And while there are concentric circles there, can you talk about the difference in your experience and those you observe and what qualities, characteristics might best identify both or either?
I mean, well, the number one distinction in my mind is, what I started to allude to earlier, which is leadership has, absolutely nothing to do with titles or authority or, span of responsibility or what have you. Absolutely nothing. In fact, everyone at any level in any organization often is displaying leadership qualities in the kinds of decisions they're making and, very intentionally raising a question on behalf of a customer or identifying something that maybe, could be done differently, better, more efficiently, more effectively, whatever the case may be. I mean, all the time. And oftentimes also not just in those ways that are clearly very business focused, but also in other ways. How many times might we have all come across, someone in a meeting or in whatever setting who maybe is hanging back or doesn't feel like contributing. There are often people who step in and again has nothing to do with titles and make way for that person and bring them in to a conversation or draw out their ideas. There's leadership happening all the time across levels in any organization in any setting. And I think that's the number one thing that people need to very early on learn to distinguish. Leadership doesn't matter what title you're wearing, doesn't matter whether you have 1,000 direct reports or 0. You have a lot of ways in which you can display leadership in an organization. Frankly, often that is the thing that unlocks opportunity for you to also grow your career. And so those things do tend to go hand in hand. I think of management, I mean, there's some obvious things. I mean, there's a lot of clear, administrative and operational, requirements around that and things that, not everybody's good at that. Not everybody's good at the, operational detail and all of those things. And so, but the things are very, very different. I also don't think that people necessarily to grow in their careers or to have influence or to be super influential necessarily need to be in management. So I think that's also important for people to think about.
So one of the things that's true, I think, inevitably is that you start out doing something that's your passion, journalism, mine too, local news, absolutely. And the more successful you become in terms of management, the less you tend to be doing the thing that you loved, right? And you tend to be, the more successful you are, the farther you get away from the thing that drove you in the first place. You obviously do have greater influence in other kinds of ways. how do you develop this? Well, you just sort of answered that, but to develop the skill set that allows you to go from the doing of your passion and your life's work into the management of it.
Yeah.
And the second question is, for our audience, what are the few things that you would recommend that a college student or a new college graduate get good at that perhaps they're not today?
No, that's a great question. So I'll the first question first. You know, like you, journalism was the passion. Reporting, you know, very specifically. People still today ask me what my favorite job was, and I readily say reporter. I loved that job. And I will tell you, actually, curiously, and I'd be interested to know if this has been true for you as well. I suspect it has been. People wonder sometimes, you know, how did you go from reporter to this? And, you know, very different skills, very different. And I'll tell you, I still deploy my reporting skills every single day. Because what did we do as reporters? You have to ask good questions. You need to study up on things just enough to be able to ask good questions, or questions that are going to get you to better understanding of issues. You're going to identify who are your, you know, subject matter experts that you can rely upon for, you know, the kind of context and important knowledge that you need to help you make better decisions, and so on and so forth. So I feel like the same things that helped to make me a good reporter have actually made me a good business leader too. And so when we think then about what kinds of skills, you know, young people now contemplating their career need to, you know, bring into it, I would say many of the same things. You know, you need curiosity first and foremost. You know, don't start from a place where you have the answers. Most of us don't, and that's okay. Start instead from a place where you are seeking understanding and learning. And I think that's really, really important. With that, I think then comes a more solutions mindset, which I think is just so critical. You know, always. People are often, I mean, it's human nature, we're quick to identify the things that are wrong. And we sort of lag behind on, well, this is how we might actually solve for this thing, and come with solutions. And you know, and I'm always, I mean, I'm a broken record on being very customer focused and being, you really understand who you serve, and what is it that they really need from you. So I think those are a few of the things I'd say.
Excellent. The notion of being customer centered, sometimes it's hard to layer that on top of other kinds of work that you're doing, like a journalist, but we are all serving somebody. We are all serving our customers, or our clients, or our students, or whoever that may be. So remembering the other is absolutely part of that. So your predecessor once told me in a conversation that I was going, oh, I couldn't possibly. And he said to me, Diane, opportunity never arrives on schedule. I have used that so many times over time. So there must be times in your career where opportunity arrived not at all on schedule, and you made a decision about whether you were going to upend your life, or upend whatever that might have been, or step up and take it. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely. And first, that's an excellent outlook, because it's so true. And you know, the truth is, life rarely happens the way you plan. And so that's the first lesson, I think, for everybody. Well, a few times actually, again, in the zigging and zagging, that move that I made from local newsroom, I was a managing editor at the time, to take on the role of, you know, basically leading our digital strategy for across all of Gannett's newsrooms. That was not something I contemplated. That was not something I even really thought was possible. I wouldn't have known to think of it as possible, I guess I should say. And but I was called by the person heading up the news division at corporate And she said, you're doing a lot of these things already. We had, launched websites. This will take us back. Your students are probably rolling their eyes. So we had just recently launched websites in our local markets. We were doing some, at the time, innovative, more, cutting edge things, which again will sound ridiculous to your students, like, starting
were.
Facebook accounts for our, newsrooms. And so they called me and said, we think you could do this and really help set a broader strategy for how we think about not just the journalism we're creating in our newsrooms digitally, but also what is the business model for this new platform, and how do we ultimately make that sustainable, since everything is clearly going in that direction. And I had to get over so many hurdles in my own mind around that. One, why in the world did they think I was equipped to do this? I was working in this one newsroom. Two, I was, I'd been in that newsroom for a number of years. I have 3 sons. One was getting ready to start middle school. The youngest was 4 years old. And I was living in Southwest Florida, about 2 hours from my family, and so had this sort of kind of built-in support system. And I was going to uproot all of us to Northern Virginia, near DC and our corporate headquarters, and where I knew no one. And I thought, what in the world am I thinking? And somewhere in there, and I think it must have been, I think my husband actually said to me, and he's always been so incredibly supportive, and I'm incredibly grateful for that. But the switch happened when he said, well, why not you? And we can figure out all these other things. And so we did. We took this leap, and that was probably the single biggest opportunity out of nowhere. Definitely not arriving on time. Could not have even had it on the ETA board. That was just not a thing. And so completely changed the trajectory of my career.
So I say here all the time, we say yes first, and we work our way back to no, one step at a time. And
that's very true. That's actually very true. And actually that point's a great one, because I've seen the evolution in myself.
Yes.
From to get to the place where I would say yes first, and then figure out the reverse engineer to how I was going to do the thing I just committed to.
Right.
I started in a very different place, and I suspect that amongst the folks listening today, there's at least one of you out there who probably feels this way. And so I'll speak to you. and I was an incredibly shy, reserved kid in school. If I could blend into the walls, I was that person. And getting up and giving a book report or what have you was tantamount to just catastrophe. I was absolutely that person. In some ways, I think that journalism was, for me, being a reporter was like body armor. Like, it gave me a reason for being. I had a reason to go talk to people. I had, this sort of baked in. I didn't have to know the things. I just needed to learn about them. And it was in itself transformative. But ultimately, and maybe this came with maturity, maybe it came with practice, but ultimately came to a place where I started to learn more often. Yeah, I might not know the thing, but I have some of the skills to help me figure it out. And so I didn't want to trade off what was possible because I was afraid that I couldn't. And my mother, actually, growing up, was very instructive in that. She would always be the one who, she never thought anything was impossible for me. But it took a while for me to get there too.
Say yes first, right? We
Say
become
yes
what we
first.
practice. I tell my students, we become what we practice, and if you don't practice, you don't become.
You don't become.
You don't become. So There's a couple questions in the chat. As women, we are so often in the workplace displaying leadership and we step outside to lead or manage up. We find ourselves being told to stay in our lane. What's your advice for that circumstance?
I know that's hard. I've experienced that a lot. And I think, you know, more times than not, more times than not, I think it's just important to stick to your guns. And I know that's a lot easier said than done. I get that, but it does take, going back to, you know, practice. You know, we become what we practice. I think it's really important that we not lose sight of that. That the first time is going to be hard, and the second time will be less hard. It's also important that we not be in it alone. The power of allyship is real, and we have to model for others what we need for ourselves. And so when we see, because we all do, when we see that exchange happen and someone who's trying to make a valuable contribution or offer an observation or share an idea is sort of summarily dismissed as, you know, it's not your lane, I think it's really important for those of us bearing witness to step in, step up and step in and reinforce the idea, push back gently or otherwise on the idea that someone from a different lane can't have a great contribution to the greater good. And so that's what I would say is we should model what we hope to have for ourselves. And I think we hopefully create momentum around that. I've seen that, I've felt that, I've experienced that, and I think it's important that we never lose sight of that.
So that's about the sort of the sisterhood of women. And I appreciate that that can be across multiple identities, but that is in some ways the question of sisterhood, and being supportive of other women in an environment where that perhaps does happen or could happen more often. So let me extract from that and ask a question about sponsorship and mentorship. So mentors are critically important as we work through our professional development in terms of opportunity, guidance, feedback. But I've always made a distinction between mentors who, let's have lunch, let me talk you through this, let me help you, support you, whatever, and sponsors who are those who I say they talk about you when you're not in the room.
That's right.
And so provide you opportunities. Oh my gosh, Maribel would be so great at this. You've got to look at Maribel around this. So
Yeah.
Can you talk in your experience, whether that's a reasonable or accurate distinction and what experiences you've had with both?
Oh, it's a perfect distinction. Absolutely. And look, in some cases, those might end up being one and the same, but not necessarily. And so I've absolutely experienced both. I think the latter, the sponsor, that's built up over time, right? That's about, you know, again, taking those moments to be able to show, come with solutions, to raise good questions and good ideas, you know, to volunteer, to do things that others are maybe not, you know, necessarily especially keen to do. In those moments, the people who are, you know, ultimately in positions of, you know, authority or leadership or influence, people take notice, and everybody wants to have people around them who A, are great colleagues, and B, have ideas, and C, are willing to do some things that maybe aren't so fun sometimes, right? And you know, you put those things together and that absolutely gets you noticed, and I think naturally leads to toward that, you know, sponsorship, you know, where people are naturally going to say, they might be sitting in a room and the room might not look a lot like you, but they're trying to solve a problem, and inevitably somebody say, oh, well, you know, Diane actually might be great at this. And, you know, the next thing you know, somebody's asking you to take on a project, which then, again, it just builds momentum. It leads to the next opportunity, the next opportunity. So I think it's really important. Never take for granted the little moments, the things you think are small. You know, I picked up an extra assignment, or I, helped this colleague think through this thing, or I, spoke up and asked a question or whatever, or I sent a note wondering if this other way of doing this thing might be helpful. Never take the little things for granted, because people do take notice. And it puts you sort of front and center in people's minds when they're seeking, who might be able to help with this next thing.
That is such good advice. That is such good advice, just to remember that the composite of little things makes big things.
Yeah.
That's really important. So speaking of sponsorships or apprenticeships, what's the best approach to take advantage of a professional mentorship opportunity? So how do you best take advantage of it? And what can one do to make the most of it when it's just for a limited time? So how do you go in there and set the place on fire in the best possible way in a short period of time?
And you're talking about professional,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Professional mentorship.
mentorship. Yeah. So look, especially if it's going to be a, say, short-lived engagement, maybe somebody's offered you time, maybe your employer has decided to invest in a mentorship opportunity, which happens and is great. To really make that work, the mentor relationship is, in my mind, a lot about chemistry.
Yes.
We can all learn from a lot of people, right? And we should take those opportunities. But a mentor relationship, in my mind, what distinguishes that is you click with that person. You have to trust it to get the most out of that relationship. There has to be sort of an innate sense of trust. That doesn't have to get built up over time. I don't necessarily, but you tend to trust people who you just have a good feeling about. And so that's really important. So I would say, if you have an opportunity for a professional mentor relationship, great. I would just ask for myself that you say, maybe you can interview 3 different potential mentors and see what clicks and what makes sense, especially if you're trying to make good use of a shorter engagement. Just make sure that that relationship is one that will work for you.
Good advice.
And make sure the person actually has the time.
Which is difficult when you're a student and you're so grateful for an alum or a professional.
Totally. No,
Yes
totally.
to that. It's hard, but it's all such good advice, because it's not likely to turn out well if you don't have those things in place.
Absolutely.
That's good advice. So I want to switch a little bit to something that has been true of you, I'm sure forever, but certainly since you've been a working professional, and that is your incredible commitment to diversity and inclusion. And we, of course, are becoming a more diverse culture, more diverse society, thankfully. But the challenges are different. The challenges are different in terms of, as a manager and a leader, being inclusive at all times, if that's humanly possible. And so how do you think about that? And what are the challenges as a manager and a leader? And what advice would you give to those also absolutely dedicated to improving inclusivity and diversity, inclusion for everybody?
Yeah, look, I think certainly in obviously most of my career has been in journalism, so I'll speak a little bit from that perspective, but I really believe this is very applicable across. My view for journalism and for our newsrooms is that we could not truly fully cover our communities if we didn't represent our communities to the greatest extent possible in that newsroom. We get it now. I think we get it a lot more now than we once did, how important, how crucially important that is, to have the benefit of different perspectives, different life experience. It helps you to see. I mean, I think about it, women in positions to decide news coverage often make very different decisions than, say, male counterparts. And there could be a lot of reasons for that, but there are things that are very unique to a woman's life experience and the unique challenges that she may have had or what have you, that will help her to see things, differently. Even frankly, coverage of, topics that are common across, but the angles of coverage might look different and be different. And so again, it's about fully bringing your whole community into your work. And so that has been incredibly important. I've often, over the years, had hiring managers, say to me, it's hard, we have this position open and we need to fill it. And we don't have enough time because the work has to get done, or maybe the position goes away if you don't fill it quickly enough. And I just reject that sort of fire drill approach, because you end up in a not great place. And I've always subscribed to the notion that diversity is truly a choice. And not only is it a choice, but it's one that ultimately delivers not just on our values, which is obviously important, but it also clearly has demonstrated that it delivers stronger business results too. And so absolutely vital, both in terms of doing the work better and more fully, and also to helping to drive the business. And so that is true across industries. That is not unique to the world of journalism and media. But I particularly have a hard time seeing how we can do our work effectively in journalism if we are not truly understanding the people we are meant to cover.
Indeed. And that is a leadership challenge and a management challenge. Not that it's difficult to do, which you can make the argument, but in terms of being a manager and a leader, the challenge to you as both is to achieve that and to be committed to it. So you provide leadership culturally around the expectation of diversity.
Yeah.
And is there?
But then there's the management. Then
right,
there's the,
I said you have advice about
then there's the actual operationalizing of those values, right?
Right.
And you have to have both. You can't just say this is a core value. That has to actually show up in how you run the business. And so, as an example, if you say that diversity clearly is important, it's important to business results and it's important to core values, well, then if you are hiring, you should insist that a part of that process is a diverse slate of candidates. Super basic,
Right.
super important, because you can't hope to ultimately identify the very best candidate and that, happily that person also happens to be, diverse, if you don't at least start with a diverse pool of candidates. So very basic, and you can operationalize that and you can make that part of your procedures and processes and standards, and hold people accountable to that. So it seems a small thing, but it's not. You have to make sure that the things you espouse as your values from a leadership perspective are readily evident in how you run the business, in how you in how even how you budget. I often I've told my teams for years, your budgets are an expression of your values and your priorities. So all of these things have to be true. And the only way you're going to see the commitment manifest is if you've operationalized it.
Walk the talk.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about change management. And as managers, as leaders, change is inevitable and rapid fire. And right now it's at light speed. And so what are some ideas you might be able to share about how do you manage, how do you lead rapid change? And given where we are in terms of time, I would specifically ask you to look at what's happening with artificial intelligence, technology. And how do you, we went through the internet. We thought that was a lot. You would Facebook for the newsroom, right?
No, I know. I mean, it's crazy to think in a span of, I've had so far, 30-year career. And in that time, I know it will feel shocking, especially to the students on the Zoom today. But I mean, I started my work and I didn't have a cell phone. There was no public internet, there was no social media. I mean, none of these things were a thing. and somehow I got to my assignments and filed stories and, you know, did all the things. But it was a very, very different world. And of course, tech has dramatically changed the communication field, has already and will for years to come. And in fact, that's the only constant, because technology will continue to evolve and at just breakneck speed. And I think in many ways, a lot of really good things have happened. We have many, many more ways to create content. We have many more ways to distribute content. We've technology has democratized who even gets to tell stories now. And so a lot of good things have happened. And then also, frankly, a lot of things that pose grave threats. You know, the viral spread of misinformation, which is undermining our, you know, trust in institutions. And even, can we agree on what facts are? These things are all critically, you know, serious things that we must tackle in serious ways. And now Gen AI, which has, again, creates enormous opportunity for new ways to create content, for new ways to drive, you know, efficiencies, and creates all kinds of opportunities, and also poses new grave threats. The speed at which, you know, viral misinformation can spread is that much more, because it can be created so quickly. Identification of fake content is really difficult. So finding our way toward a place where we all together can embrace the technology and new ways of working, and new skills and new jobs that'll need to be created. I mean, we couldn't have imagined when I started working that we'd need, you know, social media editors, and we'd be creating vertical video, and, you know, all of these things that today are just the way we do things. So too will it go with Gen AI. We just can't lose the second half of the equation, which is we also need to take the time to really create the standards, create the ethical practices, and adhere to those, so that we don't undermine all of the good that comes with the technology, with all of the bad and the threats that it brings along with it.
Gee, that would be a project for the Knight Foundation.
We are working on these things.
I do not doubt it for a moment. So we have a question. How do you prepare to be a leader in the AI area in communication? How is our students listening to this, knowing that we are on the verge and it's happening faster than anybody could ever have imagined? How do they
No.
prepare to be
Absolutely.
leaders in that business environment, or in that?
I mean, first and foremost, prepare yourself to learn. You know, like with anything new, study it, learn it, take a class, take a couple of classes, really truly immerse yourself and understand it. You may not in the long run work in technology, but I promise you that artificial intelligence will be a part of the work that you do in one form or another in any field, period, going forward. So embrace that and study it and get to know it and use it and understand where the, you know, upsides are, and where the things are that maybe, you know, you might even want to help, you know, raise the questions about, you know, potential, you know, challenges and problems and things to be looking out for. So the number one thing is just embrace it, go learn, and be equipped. I mean, somebody said to me the other day, I think I mentioned this to you, Diane, you know, people are afraid that AI is going to replace their jobs. That's not, I don't think that's true, but someone who understands AI, someone who has, you know, AI skills may well replace a person who doesn't. And so it's important to, and this would be true of anything. The more we embrace knowledge, the more we, you know, learn new skills, just the better equipped we are, not just for today's workforce, but beyond.
Lifelong learning.
Yes.
Certainly the
Yes.
case, that it takes time and energy, and you have to say yes first, and all of the things that we've talked about, but it does help make you more valuable in whatever workplace or whatever environment you have.
Absolutely.
So we've got about 5 minutes, and I'm going to take you back full circle to where we started, which was your commitment to journalism. And at one point you said local reporting is the backbone of democracy. I want to know why you think so, and then how do you take that fundamental value and those commitments that have been part of your lifelong professional and personal mission? How do we take those and make sure that we are embedding them in AI and in technology? What are the steps that you would suggest, and how do you think about maybe even contributing those kinds of initiatives?
Journalism to me is quality, independent, nonpartisan journalism is absolutely vital to a well-functioning democracy. Why? I talked about body armor earlier. To me, journalism is body armor for democracy. We need journalism to ensure that there's accountability. I don't think there's a greater accountability. Citizens equipped, by the way, doesn't have to be necessarily professional journalism in that sense, but citizens informed, equipped to ask questions of their leaders, to hold their government to account. Journalism serves a vital function. Most people are not going to be filing information requests and sitting in on city council meetings and understanding what's happening on Capitol Hill. So you need professional journalists who have those skills and have the ethical practices and standards of the process of journalism. People think anybody can create information and anybody can, but that's not necessarily making it journalism. The process of journalism is fundamental as part of this equation. And so, but that accountability, we've seen over and over. We have a growing number of news deserts. I think we're at something like 1,900 communities across the country, counties across the US, without an independent local news source. And there's been the studies. This is not stuff that we have to imagine. This is actually true, where outcomes are worse in these places. You have, a rise of when not great actors understand nobody's watching and nobody's holding them to account. It's not a leap to understand that bad things happen. And so to me, it's absolutely fundamental. It goes hand in hand. And I can tell you, it's deeply personal for me. My own family, I'm a first generation American. My family came here from Cuba after the revolution, where democratic institutions were just toppled. And there's no such thing as a free press. And so it's very deeply personal to me, that distinction, and democracy is something that we absolutely have to work at and not take for granted.
Those are words of wisdom that I hope will inform and inspire every single person who is here listening today, because certainly the democracy today depends upon truth and depends upon integrity of the truth tellers. And we're in a place now where you're in a position at the Knight Foundation, but every single one of us, educators, absorbers of, consumers of news and information, need to remain committed to those ideals and those values. I want to thank you so much for the conversation, the wisdom, the insight, the leadership, the management, and your time, which we know.
Thank you so much. This has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much. I love spending the time with you, Diane. Thanks to Lillian again for inviting me, and it's been great to be with you all today.
Well, it's been a real privilege and pleasure for all of us. So I think I'm going to turn this back to Lillian.
I also want to thank both Diane and Maribel for a really inspiring conversation today. I think we've all learned a lot. I think the students who have heard you talk can say to themselves, I want to be a leader like that someday. And so both of you have served as wonderful role models. So we all want to thank you and wish you all the best in both of you in becoming more evident role models as you go forward. Thank you again. And thank you to everyone who has joined us today.